Hello and welcome to this month's ICA LinkedIn Live that today is going to focus on the key elements of good fraud investigation. And this is in response to an inquiry that's been described as one of the worst miscarriages of justice in the history of the United Kingdom. But our goal isn't to add to the criticism and to the commentary around what went wrong in that inquiry. Instead, our focus is going to be around what a positive fraud inquiry looks like, what it feels like. Before we do that, before I turn to that, I'm going to give a very brief summary of that miscarriage of justice, particularly for those that are joining from across the world outside of the UK. You may not be familiar with what has been named the Horizon Inquiry. It's linked to the Post Office in the UK, and it arises from a new IT system that was deployed in the early 1990s. The intention was to remove pen and paper, to move from paperwork to digital. But it soon became evident that there were flaws within that system that was deployed across the UK to post offices locally. A number of bugs. I'm looking at my notes now, that one bug, the Dowell-Mellington bug, would ensure that when the system was frozen, if the user continued to press enter in certain circumstances, then the ledger would be added to automatically and without the knowledge of the user. So quite a significant bug, and others alongside that were identified. But also there were shortfalls identified within local post offices, and assumptions were made that that was as a result of sub-postmasters, the individuals in charge of that post office, stealing from the post office. That led to 900 individuals being prosecuted. Many of them went to prison. Many of them were ruined financially. Their families, of course, were affected. And since that time, of course, there's been a growing recognition to the point now that we're absolutely certain that those convictions were unsafe and they have been quashed, and some are still in the process of being quashed. A public inquiry has been launched that's been running for 4 years to try and understand just what went wrong. Our job is to think about a positive fraud investigation. We can learn from what went wrong in the post office, but thinking about it in terms of what does good look like. And I'm delighted to be joined by Haynes for this conversation. Wayne, I know that you're an experienced, seasoned fraud investigator. So welcome and thank you for your time in joining me. I mentioned 4 key elements to a successful fraud investigation.
Yep.
We talked about this, of course, before going live. Take us through the first.
The first one, Tim, is understanding. Understanding is a key element, and understanding, just to pick up on that word, it's a word that many of us will use often to acknowledge that we are compliant, or we understand the task given to us, and we will carry out that task to the best of our ability, and we will use that in our day-to-day mundane tasks. And how often has it come to the case where actually when we've come to carry out that task, we're not understanding. We haven't fully understood the ask of us. And in majority of life, we can get away with that. But when you're an investigator, when you have to, the outcome of your investigation will start to have impact upon the livelihoods of others, that understanding needs to be much more clear. And by understanding, there's various nuances we need to understand. The first aspect would be looking at, do you understand the rules, the regulations, the processes that apply to you in your role? Do you understand what's expected of you? And then when we expand it further, then it's a case of, do you understand actually what are you aiming to achieve in your investigation? What are your goals? And understanding that from the very, very beginning is key, because if you don't have a full grasp of that, then you're going to go off in wrong tangents and end up making decisions that could have serious implications.
And I think we can add to that. In terms of understanding, there's something about understanding the context for the alleged crime, whether that's the industry. I know that we've both investigated significant frauds. That's meant that along the way I've had to understand gold ore reprocessing. I've had to understand how the NASDAQ works. I've had to understand how mergers and acquisitions take place so that I could investigate the relevant facts. So there's something about understanding the big picture, but of course also a comprehensive understanding of the allegations and the immediate circumstances around that.
Most definitely. And whatever the level of investigation, even if you're investigating an internal matter, such as what happened with the Horizon aspect, you still need to understand what are you looking for. So if you're looking at a particular process, what is the process that should be understood? What should that individual have done? So you'll have policies and processes in place that you need to understand. And if that's an area that you're not used to, like you say, if you're looking at something like a gold ore, or maybe you're investigating an accountant. Now, we're all going to have an idea in our head of we know what an accountant does, but actually, what is the day-to-day process of an accountant role? And actually, then once we know that role, what are the nuances that an accountant may have that actually make their job a little bit easier? That are not actually outside the rules, but we need to understand that, because if we're delving into an investigation and you see something that actually that doesn't fit with the processes, but is it wrong? And if you don't understand that, you could find yourself going down the wrong path.
Which is what has happened in the case of these investigations that I touched upon before. So the first of our 4 key elements is a clear understanding. The second that we've alighted upon is around skills. And I know that this is something that you've done some research around. What are the key skills for an investigator? I'm
going to do a blatant plug for the ICA's Certified Financial Investigator course. And in research for that course, we looked at what are the identified core skills that would make somebody a proficient investigator. And through the research, we narrowed that down to 25 different types of skills. And I have no intention of going through all of those now. But there are 4 areas that we've drilled down to that all investigators should have an understanding to become proficient. And that is communication, decision-making, analysis, and problem-solving. And each one of those headers, we can all automatically think. So somebody says, do you understand what I mean by communication? And most people say, well, actually, yeah, I understand what you're saying there. Can I hold a conversation? Can I discuss matters? Can I listen? Well, it goes a lot more deeper than that, doesn't it, when you're looking about communication. So if you're speaking with a witness or a suspect or a colleague and you're having a conversation with them, are you trained enough? Are you nuanced enough to understand actually that person you're speaking to is actually more responsive to the questions from your colleague than you? So then it's having that knowledge, that nuance. So think, I'm going to back away now and leave my colleague to ask their questions because they are getting a better response than I am. And that's difficult to teach. But that's the key elements of just that one area of communication that you need to understand.
So what were the 4 again then? Just a quick reminder.
So a problem solving,
yes,
decision making, analysis, and communication. So again, problem solving is another particular area, and problem solving and decision making kind of go hand in hand, but can be are definitely areas that stand alone. So if you're looking at problem solving, it's a case of, well, what's the information I've got in front of me? What can I make action on? And this is where going back to that understanding in regards to, it's a phrase that I use quite regularly in the CFI sessions, is knowledge is power. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it really is. Knowledge, having the right knowledge can make you have the confidence and the courage to think, no, actually, that's not right. So when you're looking at actually, I've got a piece of information here, whatever the situation is, I've got a problem I need to solve, and having that, and I'm short of that knowledge. I don't understand that aspect. So going back to the aspect of, I want to understand, what should an accountant really do? So my problem solving there aspects is, I need to go and find out what's happening, what should an accountant do in regards to that, and then that'll allow me then to make some decision making as to, should I follow this path? Is the outcome of what I'm looking at? Is it a discipline issue? Is it a civil issue? Is it a criminal issue? Or is there nothing here to see? And that decision making and problem solving processes in the early stages can save you a lot of pain.
So we've talked then about the first two elements, a clear understanding and the skills with which to wield, to use that understanding to best effect. And you've touched on 4 key areas. I'm fascinated to know more about the 25 that underpin it, but I know that we haven't got time now to drill down to that. But there was a third area that we've identified for fraud investigations that recognises the complexity and the nuance which you've touched upon that we very often face when we are exploring a fraud. It also recognises the fact that so much of our evidence or information that we need to rely upon is digital and is held in a variety of different formats. And so the third key element is IT related. And of course, immediately we can think of IT being flawed in the Horizon inquiry. The Fujitsu new system, it was called Horizon, that was rolled out across the post offices was itself flawed. And it's interesting to see that some commentary simply blames the failure of the prosecutions and everything that followed on that flawed system. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that flawed system, whether we're talking about the Fujitsu system or any other means of IT that we use, and we may use, I'm sure most of us will use some form of IT on a day-to-day basis, whether that's to help us do a daily task, so whether we're using email or whether we're using an analysis tool or a case management tool, we will use that, we will draw upon that and accept the findings from that without so much of as a question. Actually, I've used this time and time again, this analysis tool that was really useful because it draws all this data that I've put into this particular system. And then as a result of that analysis, it identifies gaps, it identifies patterns. And from that, I can then carry out further investigation to fill those gaps and maybe expand on those patterns. But if we have too much reliance on the IT system without asking key questions, without asking, actually, is this source of the information that I'm putting in, how correct is it? And I'm going to draw upon an old phrase that used to be used back in my law enforcement days from a former detective chief inspector, and I know it's well known that it's called ABC, assume nothing, believe nobody, challenge everything. Now, you don't want to use that to its full extent because you will get nowhere. But if you are looking at information that's coming your way that is not first-hand understood by you or not been seen by you, then that's a good area to approach. Assume nothing. Actually, where's it come from? Where have we got this data from? Whether that's, and we're looking at email, whether we're looking at phone data, whether we're looking at CCTV data. What's the grounding to it? How verified is it? Can we establish the backgrounds to it? And does that correlate with the other information I have got? So you may have document evidence. So we've got IT evidence. Can that IT evidence then help us to support what we've got in document aspects? If not, are we brave enough? Are we understanding enough to turn around and go, actually, something's not right here. and I want to raise these questions. And that can take courage.
Which is a lovely segue, isn't it? It's a lovely link to the fourth element that is critical to successful investigation, which is around our behaviours. You talked about courage. That's a really good example of a behaviour. And we can see within the post office, on a number of occasions, there were failures in the right behaviour, whether that's integrity, whether that's being curious, whether it's being courageous in making a stand, or other qualities like agility, resilience, flexibility. All of these are important to effective fraud investigation. So you've given one example around having the courage to say, you know what, that doesn't make sense. Let's revisit, let's challenge it. Any other examples from your experience around the right behaviours?
The old adage of instinct is another area, and people think, actually, that we're not Columbo, but actually instinct can be a real interesting area to explore, because instinct comes from your brain. Your brain is taking in huge, vast swathes of information. And when you come away from tackling a particular issue, you may then come away from that thinking, something doesn't seem right. Something isn't right with regards to that. I'm not happy with that outcome. I'm not happy with that particular situation in regards to that. And that's your instinct. That's your brain almost saying, I need some more information to come up with an outcome. And sometimes listening to your instincts, having that courage to think, actually, I'm going to ask another question, or I'm going to delve into a bit deeper into that particular area. That takes courage, especially if you find yourself in a situation where you're dealing with an inquiry and you may have pressure, outside pressures, whether that's workload pressures or whether that's supervisor pressures or other pressures that are pushing down on you, and people are saying, I don't want you to do that. And I know we're going to explore this a bit more later, and I will delve into a story where I found myself in that particular situation. I don't want to start that now because we haven't got the time, but having that courage to turn around and go, I'm not acceptant of what you're telling me, and I want to do something about it. And if you've got leaders or other outside pressures pushing you to say, I don't want you to do that, that can be very difficult. And I've no doubt that some of the investigators in regards to the post office found themselves in that situation where they were, actually, I'm not happy with this. Something's not right. And it's having the courage to turn around and go, I want to do something about that. And I dare say there will have been some.
Wayne, I'm going to be honest, I'm still stuck on the thought of you as Columbo, sort of pausing as you go out of the door and turning around to ask that next question. But you're absolutely right. I think the problem with what you've just described is that to some extent that's been trained out of us. And we're very aware of bias, and it's good that we are, because we have to have confidence in the decisions that we make, that they're based on the right grounds and not on certain instincts or certain biases that may have crept into our thinking over time. So we have that kind of training, but the danger is that trains out the instinct. And I absolutely agree with you on a number of different levels. Our subconscious can be aware of things that haven't yet quite reached our conscious, and we need to allow them time in order to make that journey. But we're coming up to our 20 minutes. Normally I finish the LinkedIn Live by asking for key takeaways, but I think we've actually, to a large extent, done that over the last 20 minutes. The key takeaways are those 4 areas that we've identified between us that are the components of a successful fraud investigation. So again, at the risk of labouring this, they are, of course, a clear understanding of the relevant facts, whether that's the procedure, the relevant law, the requirements around how we handle information, whether it's the context of the allegation or whether it's the details of the allegation. A really clear and firm and confident understanding is so important. The second area is skills. It's hard to underestimate just how important the right skills are. Otherwise, we just don't have the ability to gather the right information, the right understanding. And if we do, we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to process it, analyze it. We don't know how to ask the questions, challenge, and so on. The third element, of course, is around technology, our dependence upon it, but also, and I think you've really usefully highlighted, that with that dependence comes a risk if we're over-dependent and unwilling to challenge. And then finally, we've recognized the importance, perhaps of the most important area, which is the right behaviors to underpin all of this. The willingness to say, no, that's just not right, or the willingness to challenge assumptions or similar. Wayne, I hope that's a good summary.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. We'll do this again. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. Wayne and I are going to carry on this conversation for a longer and more in-depth analysis around those 4 qualities. That's going to be recorded and will be available to ICA members on our LinkedIn, on our platform, our Learning Hub. But in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us. We hope this has been useful, and we look forward to seeing you again next month. Thank you, and do take care.